some of the other issues which trouble us when we look at the field of international law and how it is, whether it is relevant or not, it's not relevant, whether it can be made relevant, or is there any need for making it relevant in the life of ordinary people. I mean, that is what finally one has to look at it when we look at it knowledge system like international law. Now, I think since I'm chairing it, but I was also told to reflect on some of the issues. Since we already have a discussant, so I leave that part of going into some of the issues raised by the panelists to Shanu. Then let me briefly get into, roughly I have 20 to 25 minutes of time. One question that comes to, like both Rajan and Nizam have pointed out, is that whether international law is relevant or not. Like, I don't know if you get out of this hall and go to the people and see that we discuss so much about international law that is relevant to the people. Probably they would say that not relevant, not very much relevant. But that does not seem to be the reality. As Nizam pointed out about Iraq war, when the Iraq war was happening, the second Iraq war, one of the prominent international lawyers, was kind of a critical international lawyer from Finland, Marty Koskin, he said that he went to Brazil, one of the interior areas of Brazil, and he saw that on the wall writings that war is illegal, Iraq war is illegal. Then he said that, but what is this illegal? Who told them that this war is illegal? I mean, somewhere somebody should have said that there is something law which makes this war illegal. Then only you can say something is illegal. This is a technical terminology one has to. Now once we get into that, with the legality and illegality of war, then obviously you are referring to some law, and that law is UN Charter. And there is some provision called Article 2, Paragraph 4, which says that war is illegal. Then only you can use the word. Even if an ordinary journalist writes that there is a war is illegal, that means there is some law which prohibits or criminalizes or illegalizes something. Then you can talk about war. So whether we like it or not, somewhere I think you end up dealing with or referring to something called international law, and which is purely international. No country prohibits war, probably only international law prohibits war, because the war has to take place only between states. The other example that how it is relevant is that few days ago Vijay Prashad has written in Hindu about the recent Security Council resolution on Israeli settlement in occupied Palestinian territory. And he says that Israel is more not worried about what exactly the resolution says, but it is more worried that probably people belonging or higher authorities belonging to Israel will be taken to the International Criminal Court. Now this International Criminal Court is basically, it talks about international war crimes, settlements and deportation of individuals amounts to a war crime under International Criminal Court. Therefore there is a possibility of that happening because the prosecutor of ICC is in the process of doing it. So somehow, this is how international law comes in, which at a slightly higher level. But if you get into the trade and to get into the investment part of it, somewhere I think international law is at your doorstep. I mean, you can't avoid dealing with, or even if you do not know it, international wants to know what you do. I mean, that is how it works. But most of the times we end up not knowing it, what exactly, in what are the forms and ways that international law affects us. Most of the times it does affect through your own laws, in terms of that what becomes as your national law through national legislation, to a large extent in the last 2 or 3 decades, is happening as a response to international law developments. It's not something that all legislators have thought over it, but something is happening at the international level, and you are being forced to change your laws or being forced to come up with new laws in response to the developments that take place at the international. So that is how it is going to affect us in our day-to-day lives. But since the topic is like, then I'll go back to the topic of that word, learning international law from the South, which is a very crucial aspect, in fact, for understanding, for those who are involved in the field of international law in India or in South Asia or a larger South, is that whether international law should be looked at differently from what is being looked at as the international law from mainstream, what we call as quote-unquote mainstream or European or North American understanding of international law, or what exists as international law. Now, if to know that, okay, there is something which is being seen as the international law, but it is not necessarily the international law, it has to be looked at differently. Now, why there is a need for that? Whether the existing the international law is troubling us in any form or the other. Then only you can say that there has to be a different way of looking at international law. Yes, the answer is yes, that the existing framework of international law, since its inception in terms of its historical development till this moment, is seen to be troubling at least some states, some individuals, or some groups of states, in troubling in some form or the other. Therefore, we need to look at international law from a different way. Now, is it happening only today, or did it happen in the past, or is it happening over a period of time? The argument is that international historically are oppressive or being utilized or used by certain states or certain groups of people against others in terms of exploitation, discrimination, and oppression. Now, if you put it in a more abstract way, it looks more of a kind of a theoretical or historical. But in a more concrete way, you see that some of the scholars who have worked from this part of the world is the idea of sovereignty. The entire idea of how the idea of sovereignty evolved over a period of time. Post 1945, we had a standard understanding that there is something called a sovereign equality of states. So anything and everything, like for example, the Maldives, one of the smallest countries in the world, and the United States or India or China, or at least in a legal sense, are one and the same before the United Nations and for all practical purposes at the international level. So this is the idea which you can say that okay, it doesn't work that way, but it does work in some form, because at least you will have to work that it works. Now that is what the law is. That. Now somewhere I think why the significance of law is that most of the things that happen in and around us happen in the name of the law. Whether we like it or not, then we say that when you say that it has become law, then somewhere we're thinking that it is binding on you. That is where I say that the resolution recently passed by the Security Council. How does it make a difference to Israel and Palestine? And if you go to the people of Palestine and say that the UN has passed a resolution, is it going to make a difference to the people of Palestine? Probably it does make a difference. It doesn't make a difference not because we want it, but Israel itself takes it as so seriously, because they say that those who are following the development say that from after 1918, this is the first time that UN has passed a resolution almost saying that the settlements are illegal. Now this is a simple resolution passed by the Security Council with all its political implications, because US has abstained, therefore it has been passed, otherwise it would not have been passed. So it's a political process leading to a legal development. From then on, then it takes the name, in the name of law, things do happen. So a law which is a product of the political process has implications to all of us in some form or the other. Most of the times we tend to ignore that aspect of it. If something is taking the shape of law as an obligatory factor, both for states and at the domestic level for the individuals, then everything takes place somewhere. You have the South as a civilizing mission, you bring them into the fold of sovereignty. Now, when it happened in the initial stages of colonialism, but once this end of colonialism, of course, there's a long period of more than 150 or 200 years of expansion or development of international law. This has happened in every aspect of it. I don't want to go into the details of it, but for example, if you see the Hague Peace Conferences that have taken place 1899 and 1907, the developments that took place in Hague Peace Conferences predominantly attended by the European countries, except I think one Asian country, probably Siam was one of the countries. If you see the Hague Peace Conferences, Hague rules and regulations, the discussion was that, in fact, because I teach this subject, so it is, I can give this example. There is something called a dum-dum bullet, which was prohibited by these conferences, which is a kind of a bullet which was considered as illegal. So therefore they thought that this bullet has to be prohibited. So the discussions, if you get into that, you see that some of them argue, European countries have argued that this bullet can be prohibited between European states when they fight against each other. But when we fight against in the colonies, which are in fact uncivilized people, therefore these kind of weapons are required under international. So these are the arguments which are coming as part of an international negotiation process that was taking place in The Hague, and which both for international relations and international law, these are the conferences which are considered as a kind of important developments in the field of international relations. So in these conferences, in fact, these are the discussions which were taking place. And they were more concerned about some of the prominent European representatives in the Hague Peace conferences were extremely concerned that colonialism is, they were worried about colonialism because there were a lot of mosquitoes in Africa and Asia. Not because it is troubling Asian and African people, but it was because most of the many white people were dying because of mosquitoes. And their concerns were this. And it's a recorded history, it's not something that the story. Now this is how international law has evolved over a period of time and became instrumental in the expansion, colonial expansionist project. But of course that slightly changed post 1945 in a different form. So therefore, if you see most of the discussions that took place in 1950s and 60s and 70s within the United Nations structure, the arguments of most of the states, the newly independent post-colonial states like India, was undoing what was done in the name of international to a large extent. And some of the examples that one can take, there are several aspects one can get into that, but some of the prominent examples you take in terms of political sovereignty as well as economic sovereignty. The debates in and around political sovereignty and economic sovereignty. So therefore you see the concept called permanent sovereignty over natural resources, which keeps coming now also when this discussion takes place in and around investments that take place now. But the discussions in 1960s was in and around the argument of permanent sovereignty over natural resources. What is this permanent sovereignty over natural resources? As I said that when the colonial expansion was happening, they said that there was no sovereignty in this part of the world, therefore you could go and occupy those territories. The newly independent post-colonial states argued that there was sovereignty in this part of the world in a kind of an abeyance when the colonial occupation was happening, and through the political independence you regained that sovereignty back. Therefore, you have every right to decide upon what you would do with your natural resources. So in net result, what was happening was that we would decide as to how we deal with our natural resources, because during the colonial time, large number of companies were given concessions by way of granting licenses to them. So they wanted to undo that part. It predominantly happened in the context of Latin America, but in other parts also it has happened. So there they argued that there is the idea of permanent sovereignty over natural resources is that we decide what is to be done to our natural resources, and if the license were given by them, we would nationalize it. And we would nationalize it, there the law significance comes in, that we would like to nationalize it in accordance with what our national laws say, that is domestic laws. But they argued that it has to happen in accordance with international, because the international law had its own structure which evolved over a period of time, what you call as in the form of a customary international law, in terms of payment of compensation and others. So without going to the details, what is central is that these are the legal aspects in and around which the whole debate was happening in the post-colonial states. And this was happening within the United Nations system. Then the discussions went into in terms of what constitutes as sources doctrine, several other aspects. So that is where the Indian scholars, that is where Professor, in the inaugural listing I said that Joseph Chacko's contribution, if you see the first lecture he delivered at the Hague Academy, till now, like roughly around 5 or 6 Indian scholars have delivered the Hague lecture, that is Professor Chacko, then Shastri, probably I think there was a huge Nagendra Singh was there, then R.P. Anand, Upendra Bakshi, and V.S. Mani. These were the 5 or 6. If you see, there is a common thread among all of them, probably with slight variation from V.S. Mani's, but still even there also he talks about in terms of looking at the whole idea of humanitarian intervention in a different way. But if from Chacko's till now, trying to look at international law in terms of challenging the dominance of a particular notion of international law. Then he said about India's contribution, Chacko's lecture was India's contribution to international law concepts. followed by Shastris, the Hinduism and international law. Upendra Bakshi is completely in terms of that masters in response to what had happened in the context of Bhopal gas treasury, that was for private international law aspect. Professor Anand, sovereign equality of states and international law. V.S. Mani's with regard to humanitarian intervention, how it had to be looked at, despite the Article 2 paragraph 4 prohibition, still interventions do take place. That can be from Libya to Syria to any examples that you can take, which take place in the name of humanitarian intervention in some form or the other. So all of them were trying to look at international law with a different perspective. Now the reason is that somewhere there is an inconvenience with the existing international law as somehow acting against the interest of the larger, what you call as a third world or a south or post-colonial world, whichever the way one would like to put it. But that is the inconvenience which has been happening. Now what the Indian scholars or South Asian scholars, which Ilaiyaraaja has pointed out in terms of Veeramantri and others saying it, is that this is what they did, which Professor Chimmy and of course Hague have done a kind of a classification, is that the first generation of third world international lawyers and the second generation, therefore they call it a trail 1 and trail 2. Taking that as with all its limitations, is that the first generation of the post-colonial Indian and South Asian international lawyers were doing that was that challenging the European hegemony in the understanding of international law and accusing them of using international law in certain aspects or the other for the colonial project, and arguing that this part of the world was not new to international law, in the sense that to argue that this part of the world also had some form of understanding of international law, which may probably different, but it did have an understanding of international law. So therefore challenging the European understanding that there was no law in this part of the world, argue that there was international in this part of the world, but your understanding of international law was different from our understanding of international law. This is how they tried, Anand's writings, others from some of them from Africa, this is how they argue. But at the same time, they also thought that the international can also be used as a kind of an emancipatory project. That's where Professor Chimney kind of people saw that it's a kind of a dualism that works. That is that international law is an instrument of oppression and also international law is an instrument of emancipation and liberation. Both ways it can work. So the first generation probably argued that, okay, highlighting the oppressive nature of international law and also emphasizing on the liberating nature of international law in terms of the post-colonial states. But in the process, while doing that, they also, one can call it it's not a mistake, but it is one has to, I think probably if you lived during that time, you would have done that, is that to go along with the newly emerged post-colonial state, in the sense that what India is doing need to be supported. In the sense, Indian state, it's not the Indian people, but Indian state, what Indian state is thinking, what Nehru was thinking about international law, as a NAM, as a third world, probably need to be supported. What India's state's positions in the United Nations, what India was thinking in terms of law of the sea convention and other important international developments, were sought to be supported. In the sense that, okay, you go along with the state, means what state is thinking need to be supported vis-a-vis the European dominant world. So that is what most of the Indian scholars or South Asian scholars have done in the initial stages of 60s, 70s and 80s. So that is where people like Chimney argue that I think there is a problem with that. Means that they said that past was bad, in the sense that the international which was being looked at by the Europeans, there was a problem with that. We also had some element of international in this part of the world. Now if it can be made better, then it would be useful to the people of this part. So that is what they understand. And this can be made better through the state, the Indian state or the post-colonial state, any other Asian African state. So that is what they try to look at the international. Now the later part of the second generation of international lawyers and scholars, people like Chimney and others who try to look at it from a different way, argue that I think there was some problem with the first generation of international lawyers, in the sense that completely aligning with yourself with the state, the post-colonial state, there is some problem with that, because the state is not always acting in the larger interest of every people, every set of people. So that means that the post-colonial state itself is turning out to be oppressive. So therefore you need to make a distinction between what Indian state thinks and what Indian people think in a different way. Now this is where how this international law has to be looked at from that point of view, which is a very But that is also, it is also being done consciously, I feel that it's not an unconscious act that is being done. Now what is required for us now is that, what are the implications of the development that are taking place in international world to the ordinary people, whether it's a trade or investment or environment or human rights in any aspect, whether that they have implications to ordinary people or not. Now I'll end here by saying that why one should look at that way. Should one look at international order? Because what is being required, for example, if it's what WTO is doing, or what bilateral investment treaties do, what states are doing in terms of expansion of it, inviting more number of investments, would help people. Why do you think that there is a problem with that? Now one has to take a very clear position, which is not a legal position, which is a political position one has to take, is that where do you want to stand, which side do you want to stand. Whether you believe that there exists some problem, there is unevenness that exists in the world, which has been there, which we ourselves argued that colonialism was bad, international law in fact played a role of an instrument in terms of colonial expansionism. Do we say that everything has become good now? Therefore you don't need to think different. What is being given to us can be taken as it is. Why should we think different? Or should we think that what was happening during the colonial project probably is happening in a different way? Now that affects in terms of gender, that affects in terms of social relations, that affects in terms of caste. Whether do we need to look at international law from that perspective or not? Now that one has to take a position in terms of a conscious political position, which side you want to. Then only you can have it right. Otherwise law itself does not help you, because you can equally argue that by bringing in more investment, by liberalizing your economy, or by siding with the bigger powers, by becoming a member of the UN Security Council. There is no discussion happens in more. I have not seen any discussion that why India should become a permanent member of the Security Council. Now we all feel we have a suddenly patriotism comes in, India should be there. We have people who come here 1 billion people. But why do you want to be part of Security Council? Because you want to act like another US or Russia, another big power. Because we are the people who argue that Security Council is an undemocratic institution, therefore this should go, the UN General Assembly should be strengthened. Then suddenly why we want to be part of a permanent member of the Security Council? Now why should we become party to, all of us party to an undemocratic institution, like in UN Security Council? Why can't we argue that General Assembly has to be strengthened rather than Security Council? Now one has to take a position, just because we want to be part of it, that suddenly Security Council becomes a good power. It doesn't. Fundamentally it's a problematic. So here this kind of, in such situations one has to take a very clear position on that, whether we want to be on the side of the Security Council, whether we want to be critique of the Security Council, therefore we would be critique of the Indian state also. One has to take that position and say that India should not become part of an undemocratic institution like the Security Council. So it happens in every aspect of it. Somewhere I think with regard to the questions of the gender. So should we take that some of the international lawyers, of course, very late it started for the discipline of international in terms of gender and other aspects of it. Whether international has to be challenged, it has to be challenged. And they have done that thing. And its results are prominent in the sense that probably 20 years ago, nobody talked about the gender in international law. But some scholars started questioning it. When they started questioning it changed the understanding of international law. It changed the understanding of the jurisprudence of the courts. For example, when you look at ICTR, like Tribunal for Rwanda, when it talked about defined the rape for the first time under international law, it not only defined what constitutes a rape, it also went to the extent of saying that rape in certain circumstances would amount to genocide. Now, if you look at that, the developments post these developments led to the 1998 the adoption of the Rome Statute, where they talked about the equal gender participation, led to the more number of women judges on the ICC. And at one point of time, the president of the International Criminal Court, the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, and the registrar of the International Criminal Court were women, and a year ago. Now, it did not happen as an accident. There is almost 20 years of continuous writings by feminist scholars. Some of the judges, one or two judges who were in the ICTR, changed the understanding of the jurisprudence of these international courts and tribunals, which led to what we have in the women's participation on the ICC, which doesn't happen with ICJ, that is International Court of Justice. You don't have, till recently there was no women judge, I think till Rosalind Higgins became the first judge, women judge. After that, only 3 of them have, China has, and something. So, but ICC, which is a young institution, could have a good amount of participation from women. It did happen because of the association part. Now, these are the issues which one has to look at it and take a position that on which side you would like to agree. So, while doing that, you may be disagreeing with the dominant understanding of international law. You may be disagreeing with what your state thinks as the international law and the understanding of international law. Maybe you may have to challenge some of the prominent international lawyers who have been working, which one has to take. Now, that is where I think the way of looking at international from the South ideally should locate itself. Now, it did create Souths within South. Of course, within the field of international, there are several Souths within South, in the sense that we, from the South, Southern voices, there are certain dominant voices which in fact talk about the South or represent the South, the global South. Because in the process of emergence of the global South voice, there were also certain voices which were silenced within the global South. Now that needs to be addressed. In the same, for example, classic cases with regard to India. I'll just close that with that. With regard to India, for example, if you see some of the discussions that take place in and around 20 years ago, not 20 years, 15 years ago, there was a huge discussion in India when Durban conference was taking place with regard to xenophobia and caste discrimination. So there was a large number of Dalit human rights activists talked about equating that Dalit discrimination, the caste discrimination should be equated with racial discrimination. This is an argument which, and they wanted it to be brought under the category of racial discrimination as part of racial discrimination convention. So Indian state took a clear position that caste cannot be equated with race. Now, which position you would like to take? If you want to take a 60s and 70s post-colonial state position, then you have to side with Indian state. Or you want to be critical of the Indian state and go along with the position taken by some of the human rights activists, Dalit rights activists, that it has to be equated with it. Now one has to take a position on this. Now these are the aspects which in fact have not been addressed even with the progressive international lawyers from India. Even all those progressive international lawyers whom we can highlight from South Asia, none of them have addressed this issue. Which is a kind of another South being created within South. Like these are the voices which are being silenced. And indigeneity, the question of indigenous person. Like very surprisingly, the government of India's position is that all the Indian people are indigenous people. This I came to only recently when that is an official position in United Nations states that all of us are Indian. Probably the understanding must have been that looking at the idea of indigeneity from settler colonialism. That means that for them, I think indigeneity is in relation to Canada in Australia. Because there the colonialism is a settler colonialism, you go and settle there. So therefore all those who are the original people become indigenous people. Since that did not happen to us, all of us are indigenous people. Now these are the issues which need to be contested or questioned or interrogated in terms of like what happens in terms of the investment expansion and mining, those issues that take place in the tribal part of India, which have direct international law getting operated on the ground. In fact, it happens in that sense. Now, whether we can develop counter narrative to that, yes, it is possible to them. It's not that it is an impossible thing. So one has to really, if there is no law, a legal argumentation has to be developed to counter the dominant view of international. I think that the best way of, or one of the ways of doing justice to what we understand looking at international law from southern part of the global south and also dealing with southern part of India, several other souths within south. These several other souths can exist in Africa, in Latin America, or in Asia. So I'll end there and leave